As an NFL fan, the draft is one of my favorite times of the year for the league. Each team's fans are optimistic for the future, and it gives even the worst franchises something to look forward to and be hopeful about. One of the most exciting things about the draft is how unpredictable the entire thing can get. You can find a game-changing stud in any round, but the wrong pick can completely cripple a team for years. Throw into that things like draft day trades, and you have a recipe for an insane 3 days every spring. Lots of guys drafted high are able to turn their teams around overnight, and it's always awesome to see later round players develop into superstars too. But today we're talking about the most feared type of draftee, the bust. Before we start, we should probably clarify what exactly a bust is, or at least what I think one is. A bust to me is someone who was hyped up enough out of college to usually be an early pick, but completely failed to translate their college success into the league. The NFL is a completely different game from college football on pretty much every level. Even practice squad guys are the best of the best, and it's just impossible for every player to have a seamless transition into the league. Anyways, now that we've sort of outlined what a bust is, I'm going to tell the stories of a few of them, some of the worst ones the NFL has ever seen. So without further ado, let's get into this list. So I feel like it's only fitting to start this list off with one of the most famous draft busts ever, which would be quarterback Ryan Leaf. Ryan Leaf was the number 2 overall pick by the Chargers in 1998. He was drafted one spot after future Hall of Famer and 2-time Super Bowl champion Peyton Manning. Leaf was so hyped up out of college, though, that there was a legitimate debate over who the Colts were going to take with that number 1 selection. Now, in hindsight, it's safe to say that the Colts easily made the right choice going with Peyton. But what the Chargers got out of Leaf was nothing short of terrible. Ryan Leaf was immature, and he had personality issues that were off the wall, not exactly traits that you want your franchise quarterback to have. He couldn't perform in big games, but he really couldn't perform well in any games, to be fair. In his first year, he threw for only 2 touchdowns with a whopping 15 interceptions to go along with them. 2 years later, he was out of the league completely. Ryan Leaf is just a sad story of immaturity getting in the way of a possibly great career. He had the talent, and there have been guys, even Peyton Manning, who was drafted 1 pick before him, who've had bad starts to their career. But Leaf just never had the mental strength to overcome it and work hard to turn himself into a good NFL quarterback. One thing that can add major insult to injury after a lot of these busts are drafted is the Hall of Fame talent that was still on the board. In the case of Ryan Leaf, the Chargers could have had a guy like Charles Woodson or Randy Moss, but instead they made the wrong pick and hurt their franchise for years because of it. Probably the worst example of a horrible draft pick when insane talent was still available was when the Green Bay Packers drafted Tony Mandarich number 2 overall in 1989. For a team with such a strong history as the Packers have in the NFL, the 80s were a horrible decade for them. They were yet to be revived by the Brett Favre and Reggie White-led teams of the mid-90s, and they found themselves with the number 2 pick in the 89 draft. Mandarich was one of the most hyped-up players and probably the most hyped-up lineman ever coming out of Michigan State. He was an athletic freak, and he had a massive frame to go along with it. He was seen by everyone in the league as an instant star on the offensive line, who would be a huge piece in the Packers organization for years to come. Tony definitely had the tape and the statistics to back that up, but the only problem was the fact that all of it was completely illegal. See, the 80s were a much different time for sports, especially in college. Drug tests were spotty and not frequent at all, meaning that players being on steroids was not an uncommon thing. Tony Mandarich was on steroids, and after coming to the NFL, that became wildly clear. Having to stop using the drugs completely ruined his play and made him a non-starting caliber lineman faster than you can say mistake. The worst part about this pick, though, is who was drafted around Tony Mandarich. Of the first 5 picks in this draft, 4 of them would go on to be Hall of Famers, with Mandarich being the exception. Legends like Derek Thomas, Deion Sanders, and Barry Sanders would be the next 3 picks after the Packers' selection, and it's more than safe to say that they definitely took the wrong guy with this one. So before we go today, I feel like no NFL draft bust list would be complete without the story of Jamarcus Russell, who many people basically associate the word bust with at this point. Coming out of LSU in 2007, Jamarcus was seen as the best prospect in years. He was in that John Elway, Peyton Manning tier of can't bust type of projections. Unfortunately, though, Jamarcus didn't live up to be anything near what those two players were. He came into the league and immediately held out through training camp for more money. He got the contract he wanted, but didn't actually start until the last game of his rookie year, in which he had 3 turnovers. He ended the season with 2 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but he was named the starter for the next year nonetheless. The 2008 season wasn't horrible for Jamarcus, it just wasn't really good either. He had almost 2,500 yards and threw for 13 touchdowns with 8 interceptions to go along with them. Had he continued this upward trend, who knows what could have happened. Similar to Ryan Leaf, he had the talent to be successful. The only problem is that he didn't continue the upward trend. He actually regressed in 2009. Jamarcus Russell famously came into training camp with huge questions about his work ethic and his weight. There are insane photos of him in that summer in which he showed up to camp apparently around 300 pounds and ridiculously out of shape. There's also the infamous story in which the Raiders gave him blank tapes to watch in order to see if he was really watching film or not. When they asked what he saw on them the next day, he said that he'd been watching blitz packages on them all night. That year, Jamarcus Russell would throw 3 touchdowns to 11 interceptions and get benched, seeing the end of game action in his short career. There's no real way to say if someone was a bust or not, because making it to the NFL alone is a huge achievement. But these are 3 stories of guys who definitely had the tools to make successful careers for themselves, but just didn't. There's a certain art to busting as a top NFL pick, since there's so many different ways to do it. You can be immature like Ryan Leaf, juiced up and cheating like Tony Mandarich, or just lack any drive to get better like Jamarcus Russell. At the end of the day, though, it's these guys that make draft weekend so fun, since you know that nobody is safe from becoming a bust.